The WNBA is heading back to Portland in 2026, and joining me today to talk all about it is Sean Highkin of the Rose Garden Report, who broke the story back in August. We'll talk all about Wednesday's formal announcement and press conference, what we know and don't know, as well as the excitement that's brewing. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Women's Basketball is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If this is your first time listening to Locked On Women's Basketball, welcome. We at The Next have over 100 reported pieces every single month. We have a beat reporter on every single WNBA team, one on more than 15 different NCAA beats, so get that YouTube subscription up. And you can also support us by subscribing to The Next for $9 a month, $72 a year at thenexthoops.com. Today, we'll talk all about Wednesday's formal announcement and press conference of the Portland WNBA team coming in 2026, what we know and don't know, and the excitement that's brewing in the city. Joining me today is Sean Highkin of the Rose Garden Report. So before we dive in, Sean, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your coverage?
Yeah, so I've been covering the NBA for over 10 years and going into my third NBA season of doing an independent Substack called the Rose Garden Report that's covering the Trailblazers because I'm based in Portland. So that's kind of my area of focus. And so that's kind of what I do on more of a day-to-day basis. But, you know, as it relates to, you know, the reason that you're having me on here, this WNBA expansion story is something I've been tracking for probably a little over 2 years at this point, because I think in late spring, early summer of 22 was when the WNBA announced that they were looking to add a few teams in the next few years. And there was a report that Portland was on the short list at the time of cities that they were looking at, along with two other cities that ended up getting teams already, with the Bay Area and Toronto. And then obviously we may get to this, but obviously they've got one more they have to do still. Kathy wants to expand to 16 teams by 28. But obviously in Portland, there's a huge fan base for women's sports when you look at, you know, how successful the Thorns are in the NWSL, and also how successful the Oregon and Oregon State women's basketball programs are and how popular they are. And, you know, the Oregon team in particular has turned out a lot of, you know, high level WNBA players like Sabrina Ionescu and Satu Sabali. And, you know, it's a city that, as the WNBA is looking to expand, it's a city that I think on a lot of levels would have made a lot of sense to, you know, get in on. And I know Portland had a team 22 years ago with the Fire, which folded, but that was, you know, the league was in a very different place at that point, and, you know, the economics were different than they are now, and it's just a whole lot of stuff that I'm sure we'll get into. But This is a story I've been following closely since then, and especially, you know, because I cover the Trailblazers and I know a lot of the people on their business side. The Blazers aren't involved in the ownership group directly, but they do control the arena. And so they've been very involved in that part of it. And also, you know, they've been, you know, behind the scenes of it. They're at the ownership level. They've been very supportive of wanting the team to be in Portland because they think it would be good for the city, and because they think like they can help it be successful, even if they're not owning the team. So this is just a story I've been following for a long time. And, you know, we all saw how the last time I was actually on this show with Jackie last November was right after everything fell apart at the 1 yard line, when Portland was supposed to get announced as the 14th team that was going to start in 2025 along with Golden State. And now, you know, 11 months later, we're back here in Portland. We're less than 24 hours removed from Portland actually having a team announced. That's official. It's done. It's happening. It's not going to fall apart at the last minute again. So we're good.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the WNBA had the Portland Fire that folded in 2002, and it's been more than 25 years since the Portland Power of the ABL played.
Yep.
But, it's been formally announced. The ball is rolling. You broke the story that this was coming back in August. So starting off, who's behind this expansion team, and what made them a good fit for the WNBA to go forward with this expansion team?
Well, the ownership group is the Bethal family, which if you're a fan of the NWSL, you know them as the group that bought the Thorns from Merritt Paulson at the beginning of this year for $63 million. So, they've got money. Like they've also, there's that part of it, the part that they've got the money. B, they just bought the Thorns, and so they're already invested in women's sports in the city. So, and they're already in the process of building the Thorns. I don't think they figured out the location yet, but they're in the process of building the Thorns, their own practice facility. And, the idea, the thing that's kind of been floated around publicly that I think is what's ultimately going to end up happening is that they're going to build one facility that's a state-of-the-art facility for both the Thorns and the WNBA team, and kind of have it all under one roof and on one, property, since they're going to own both of the teams. So I think there's a lot of room for, WNBA and WSL synergy in that way. And especially because I think there's going to be a lot of overlap with the fan bases. So that's a thing that they had. And the other thing, and I think this can't really be overlooked, I haven't seen this talked about much nationally, but the Bethals have been in the Sacramento Kings ownership group since Vivek Ranadive bought the team 11 years ago or 12 years ago, or whenever it was that Vivek bought the team from the Maloofs. Raj Bethal, the father of the brother and sister that are running the Thorns and the WNBA team, their father, Raj, is Vivek's alternate governor on the NBA's board of governors. So they've been in the NBA family as far as like ownership, group and, doing business on the league level, that kind of stuff for over 10 years. And so whether, Kathy and then like the NBA board of governors has to vote on it, like they don't have to vet them because they've been in the family for 10 years and their money has been vetted. And, it's not like people had to vouch for them because it's people that they know. And so it was easy for the NBA to just kind of rubber stamp this once they put the money up and say, okay, these guys know what they're doing. So I think it's going to be a better situation than the ownership group that fell through last year would have been. I'll put it that way.
And going off of that, as we mentioned a little bit, there was that previous expansion attempt that fell through, as you said, at the 1 yard line. What made this bid different, and what made it, get that final push into getting that formal announcement on Wednesday?
I think it was mostly about the ownership group because Kathy Engelbert, when it fell through last year, she sent a letter to Ron Wyden, who's one of our U.S. senators, who's been a very public, vocal advocate for this to happen. She sent him a letter that was made public, which was how a lot of people, including the Blazers, found out that the team wasn't going to happen. But the reason that she cited was that they didn't know what the plans were for some upcoming work that the Blazers have to do on renovating the Moda Center. And so until they figured that out, they were going to pull back. That was her official reasoning. And while it's true that they do need to do a couple summers worth of renovations on the arena over the next, few years, I think the goal is to get it all done by 2030 because Portland is supposed to host the women's Final Four that year. So they want to have it all done by then. And so there's going to be a couple of seasons where the WNBA team is going to have to play at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, which is right next door. It's a building the Blazers used to play in before they built the Moda Center. So, and it's still up. They have like concerts and minor league hockey and stuff in there. It's like it's not great, but it's like a usable arena. It's going to be fine for like a couple of years while they finish these renovations. But the reason that I never bought that was why it fell through, and, we just saw this borne out yesterday, they still haven't figured out when they're going to do those renovations. All the things that the stuff that Kathy said, we're going to pull back on this expansion bid until we know what, we have some clarity about when the expansion or when the renovations are. They still don't have that clarity. So it wasn't the renovations because like they still haven't figured that out and Portland still got a team. What I think really happened was the guy who was going to own the team last year was this guy named Kirk Brown, who co-founded a company called Zoom Info. which is like a business analytics. It's kind of similar. It's kind of a similar thing, I think, to Qualtrics, which is the company that Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, founded. But it's like kind of in that space of like business data analytics. And he's one of these guys that became a billionaire early in COVID because his company went to an IPO. But that's kind of where most of his money came from. And in the year leading up to when he was supposed to finalize the bid on the WNBA team, his company's stock fell by 50% in price. So it kind of got to the point where maybe he just didn't have it anymore as far as like being able to afford the team and being able to do what he wanted. And I think that had more to do with why it fell apart than this, this reasoning that Kathy gave of the arena renovations. And, you look at the Bethals by contrast, their money's in a lot of different places. Raj, the father, started a swimwear manufacturing company in the 60s that's doing really well. Like that's a business that they've had for decades. It's been, that's done really well for them. They have a bunch of real estate stuff. They have a bunch of different, like their money comes from a lot of different places. So it's not like if one company's stock craters like the Zoom Info guy did, then suddenly they don't have money anymore. Like they're and like I said, they've been in the NBA for over 10 years, and their money's been vetted, and everybody knows kind of that they've got it, and that they're going to be able to make this happen. And so I think that was kind of the biggest thing that reassured the league, because the whole time they knew that they were never going to find a better market to expand to than Portland, for all the obvious reasons why a WNBA team in Portland would make sense. And they wanted to make it happen. And it turned out that the guy that they thought was going to be the right owner for it turned out not to be. And then it just so happened that at the time, there was that scandal with the Thorns, who used to be owned by Merritt Paulson, who also still owns the Portland Timbers in the MLS. And there was it was a whole report that came out about there was a coach who was abusing some of the players on the Thorns, and Merritt Paulson basically kind of looked the other way and didn't really do anything to stop it. And so as a result, as his solution, he sold the Thorns but not the Timbers, as opposed to selling both teams. But the Bethals came in, they bought the Thorns, and this was like right around the same time that the previous WNBA bid fell apart. And so they were looking at they just kind of looked around. I mean, they're business people, and they also are just about to invest in a women's sports team in the city. And they're looking around like, hey, there's interest in Portland in a WNBA team, and their ownership group just fell apart. Could we do something here? And so then they ended up, they started talking to Kathy, and that just kind of made sense the way everything kind of fell into place.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about what we know, what we don't know, and the press conference that you were at with the formal announcement on Wednesday afternoon. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. The WNBA playoffs start on Sunday with the New York Liberty taking on the Atlanta Dream, the Connecticut Sun taking on the Indiana Fever, the Minnesota Lynx playing the Phoenix Mercury, and the Las Vegas Aces playing the Seattle Storm. You can bet on individual games as well as playoff series. For each series, you can bet on the total games for the series and more. You can also bet on which team will win the championship, who will win Finals MVP, and you can even build your own parlay. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is brought to you by Apostrophe. I've struggled with self-confidence as I've been planning my wedding over the last year. I've prioritized taking care of myself and being kind to myself, and over time have grown to love myself more than I have in years. One of the biggest things that can lead to a lack of self-confidence is your skin, and that's why we're excited to partner with Apostrophe, the sponsor of this episode. Just fill out an online consultation about your skin goals and medical history, take a few selfies, and a dermatology provider will create a customized treatment plan for you. Apostrophe offers access to prescription treatments for all types of acne and has been crucial in helping my adult acne. We have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon when you use our code LOCKEDON. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners. To get started, just go to apostrophe.com/lockedon and click Get Started. Then use our code LOCKEDON at sign up and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring this episode. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So you were at the press conference. What were your biggest takeaways from the event?
People are really excited about this. That's kind of the that's like a cliche, but that's kind of the biggest. I mean, the event itself, they kind of had a who's who of they had Ron Wyden, who I mentioned earlier. They had Ted Wheeler, the mayor. They had Kim Hampton, who played for the New York Liberty in the 90s and I believe works at Nike now. So she's based in Portland. And so, you could get a former WNBA player in and kind of have her be in the mix too. And then they had a bunch of Blazers, executives on the business and basketball side there. They kind of just brought out everybody and made it into kind of a celebration of, A, this finally happening, and B, just like of how good of a market it's going to be, I think, for the league. And, both Kathy and Lisa Bethal-Mirage, who's going to be kind of the controlling principal owner of the team, talked about how Portland is the global, they both called it Portland the global epicenter for women's sports, which I think it's kind of hard to argue with, given the combination of Nike and Adidas are both in the backyard, and the Thorns have led the NWSL in attendance pretty much every year that they've existed. So I think I honestly just got a lot of relief from everybody that after what happened last fall, this thing finally got done, and it's actually going to happen now.
And then what else do we know?
We know that the team is going to start in 2026. It was supposed to start in 25 when it was going to get announced last year, but it's going to start in 26 along with the Toronto team that got announced in May. We know they're going to play their first season in 2026 at the Moda Center. So that's not going to be one of the summers where they do the renovations. And we don't know whether they're going to, play in 26 and 27, and then they do the renovations in 28 and 29, or they're going to alternate. We don't know that, but we know they're going to play their inaugural season in 2026 at the Moda Center.
And then we've talked a lot about what we know. What don't we know?
Well, the biggest thing we don't know is the name. I think they said they're gonna go, I would imagine this is I know Toronto is doing this. They put out like a whole podcast series about it, but like they're gonna solicit suggestions from the public for a name. They haven't figured any of that out yet. There is a lot of, local push for, to bring back the Fire name and logo. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. If I had to guess, I think they probably end up going with something else. But there is definitely some, I still see a lot of people wearing Portland Fire jerseys around town. It's kind of like a cult throwback thing in town. So I think there would be some nostalgia if they did that. But I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think they know what they're going to do on that front either. We don't know that. We don't know what the practice facility is going to look like. Like I said earlier, I think the plan eventually is going to be to have the Thorns and the WNBA team practice in the same building and build them some sort of state-of-the-art thing that can house both teams. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, and one of the things that I think is an encouraging sign about this ownership group, was that, we were asking the new owners about what they're looking, what they might do with the practice facility. And Lisa Bethal-Mirage was talking about how she has kind of learned from owning the Thorns that there are different things you have to think about when you're building a practice facility for female athletes as opposed to male athletes. And that's all stuff they're going to have to take into consideration when they're building a facility specifically for women. So that's the fact that that's something that they're thinking about and talking about publicly, I think is pretty encouraging for, them being the right ownership group for this. But we also don't know where it's going to be or how long it's going to take to build or any of that stuff, but they are going to build a facility. So we know that. And then they haven't made any hires yet. They don't have a GM. They don't have a team president. They have an ownership group and a start date at this point. That's all they've got. Everything else is kind of a blank canvas.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about the excitement that's brewing in Portland. So you mentioned this in relation to the press conference, but just how excited is the city of Portland?
Well, after the press conference, which was a kind of invite-only thing on the court at the arena, out in the courtyard area around the arena, they had this whole like block party thing that was put on by, and I'm sure you've heard about this, but the Sports Bra, which is a bar in Portland that exclusively airs women's sports. It's been incredibly successful, and I think now they're franchising to a few other cities. Like that's something that they're looking at doing because it's been really successful here. But there was a good turnout. I stay after the press conference. I stayed at the block party for a couple hours and just kind of checked it out, wandered around, talked to some people. Saw a lot of Portland Fire jerseys, like throwback Portland, like Jackie Stiles jerseys from the 2001. I saw some of those. People are just excited about. Like I have a lot of in my personal life. I have a lot of friends who have already like texted me and said, "Oh, I put my season ticket deposit in already." Like people are excited about this, and I think people are going to get up for it. Like I think, like I said earlier, the Thorns lead the NWSL in attendance pretty much every year. I would not be surprised if the Portland WNBA team also leads the WNBA in attendance once it gets up and running. I think, the interest is going to be there. I think people are going to be really excited for it, especially, we'll see how the next, one thing I'm really interested in. I mean, with the way that the women's college game is exploding, I think there's a chance that one of these, whoever the next Caitlin Clark is could, the way the lottery shakes out, it could land in Portland because like under the current eligibility rules, and I'm sure they might change this. This might be off the table because they might change this in the new CBA that they have to negotiate next year. But under the current eligibility rules, Juju Watkins can't come out till 27 because she won't be 22 by the time her junior year is up. So she couldn't come out after her junior year. She'd have to stay all 4 years. In 2027, Portland will have just played their first season. And I would imagine that if you're an expansion team, you're probably not going to be very good. And so they'll be in the lottery. So if Portland gets like a Juju Watkins or like one of these, big college stars that's going to be coming out in the next couple of years, and you have because when the Thorns started in the NWSL, whenever that league was founded 10, 11 years ago, they got Alex Morgan in the player allotment or allocation or however they did it at the time. And so it's like you're launching this team and you have this big star from the national team that everybody knows about. And that, that was another thing that got people excited. And so if, one of these big college stars like Juju or whoever it may be comes in and ends up in Portland, that's just going to take it to a different level.
Yeah. And that is another thing we don't know, even for the Golden State Valkyries next season, how the expansion draft and player allocation is going to happen. But, how do you expect the Portland WNBA team to impact the community long-term?
Oh, it's going to be huge. I mean, I saw there was already the Oregonian had a story where they talked to pretty much every high school girls basketball coach in the city. And they were all talking about we can't wait to take our players to these games. And, so there's that end of it. There's also I'm sure they're going to do all the, charitable and community stuff that, that professional sports teams do. But I think whenever a city has a new professional sports team coming in, especially when it's not a situation where they, squeeze the city for money to build an arena and there's not any of that kind of stuff that comes with it. So there's not bad feelings about it in that way. I think people are just going to be really excited about it. And I think it has an opportunity to do a lot of good things.
And then, what makes Portland not just the right pick for a WNBA team, but a unique city for the WNBA?
Well, I mean, so like I said, the Thorns are extremely popular here. So there is the women's sports fan base kind of already built in that I think a lot of that, I mean, I know soccer and basketball are two different sports, but just, living here and knowing kind of the vibe of it, I think a lot of those two fan bases are going to carry over and cross over from each other. And Portland also just loves basketball. Like the Blazers are still, even though, they're rebuilding right now because they just traded Damian Lillard last year. So they're rebuilding right now. Their attendance was still, like, their TV ratings fell, but that's a whole other thing because of like local TV rights stuff that has nothing to do with this. But like their attendance was still pretty good and people still care about that. I mean, the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing and have enough interest to sustain it still, even when they're rebuilding, like, people care about basketball in this city and people support women's sports in the city. You put those two things together, like it's a pretty obvious fit. And the other thing is that even back in the day, the Portland Fire, like, it folded because like the league like expanded too quickly. And there was like some weird, financial stuff and economic stuff going on with the league at the time as a whole. But the Fire got like 8,000 fans per game during their 3 seasons, which for the time was one of the better attended teams in the WNBA. So like the interest is, I think, like, as like a unique situation, I think it just makes so much sense. Like this is just the perfect market for it. And I think it's going to do really well here.
And we've talked about this a little bit, but the ball is more than rolling at this point. What can people in Portland expect between now and 2026? So about 20 months when the team takes the court for the first time.
Well, they got to hire a coach. Well, I think the coach is probably going to come last, but like they haven't made any hires. They're probably going to have to hire a team president at some point on the business side and then a GM, which, the Golden State has kind of done some of that. And then when the Toronto team was announced, they had Teresa Resch from the Raptors kind of already in place that was going to be part of the group. So they're going to have to get a lot of that stuff figured out. Obviously, they got to have a name. They got to have a logo. They got to have uniforms. I think there's going to be I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but I think there's going to be some community involvement in that as far as like taking submissions and having a vote of some kind. They sort of implied that it was going to be a public input type of thing. They implied that kind of yesterday at the press conference. So they got to do that. We got to find out what the practice facility is going to be. So there's plenty of stuff to roll out. It's not just they've announced this team, check back in 2 years. There's going to be stuff happening over that time as far as staffing and coming up with the logo and the name and the uniforms. And then, to me, the biggest thing is really the practice facility, like how that looks, especially because, the way the WNBA, like you've seen different teams kind of have to, like the Mercury just opened a big practice facility that's state of the art. The Seattle Storm opened one. The Chicago Sky, basically they got all that backlash because they had like one of the worst ones in the league, like at Angel Reese's introductory press conference, and now they just announced plans. So now it's like and this is another reason why I think the Bethals are a better choice to be the ownership group than the other group would have been, is that, players are going to decide where they want to play based on which organizations have the good amenities and which ones treat players well. And so if this practice facility is as good as they say it's going to be, I think that's going to be a huge thing. And, having Nike here, like, doesn't hurt with that either. Like they can, there'll be some things that they can help out with from that end, I'm sure. But I think, as far as what to look forward to, yeah, that's kind of it. Like name, logo, uniforms, hires of like high level, like executive staff, practice facility. Those are kind of the big things.
So there is still plenty to be excited about. And, if any of our listeners are in the Portland area, are they able to put down those season ticket deposits now?
Yeah, $26, which I assume means it is because the team is starting in 26. I'm assuming that's how they got to that number. I have no idea how much the actual season tickets are going to be, but they're taking deposits. And Alex Bethal said during the press conference yesterday that because the Golden State Valkyries just announced that they got over 17,000 season ticket deposits. He said they want to get to 20,000. Alex Bethal said that, which is going to be interesting because the Moda Center's capacity is around 19,000. So I don't know how that's going to work, but they're taking deposits right now. So you can, if you want to put in a deposit, you can go do it. I don't know how much it's actually going to cost. I would imagine it probably won't be cheap given how much demand there's going to be, but it's probably going to be cheaper than Blazer tickets. So you can, if you want to, you can.
Awesome. Well, listeners, if you're in the Portland area, you can do that. But wait till you finish the show. And then Sean, what are you personally most excited about regarding the WNBA expanding to Portland?
I'm excited to. I've never in my career. I have never. First of all, like I'm still like relatively new to the WNBA. Like this is over the years I'll like watch games here and there and then like get into it during the playoffs. This is the first season that I've been like watching games pretty much every night and like knowing more than just like the stars by name. Like this is the first year that I can say I've like more than just like a casual watcher of it. So I've been, since I've had a pretty good idea that this was coming. So I'm trying to, really immerse myself in it over the next couple of years so that when I'm actually covering it, I'll, know the landscape and know the league and know all the players and all that stuff. So that's going to be fun to kind of keep doing. And also just from my own like career standpoint, I have never covered an expansion team from day zero of their existence. Because like I said, right now they don't have anything except an ownership group and a start date. They don't have a name. They don't have a logo. They don't have uniforms. They haven't hired a GM. They haven't hired a coach. They haven't done the expansion draft. Like I've never covered a team that didn't exist and now exists. And now they have to figure out literally everything about their entire existence. So that's going to be kind of fun and interesting and different for me personally.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me today, Sean. Where can the listeners find you online?
Well, on my Twitter/Instagram is just my last name @Highkin, Highkin. But I would really encourage people to go to rosegardenreport.com, which is my Substack, and sign up for free or paid subscriptions. Most of the stuff I write is paywalled. If you're specifically just a WNBA fan, there's probably not going to be a ton there right now on that, just because there isn't a ton to talk about yet because they don't have any of that stuff. But obviously I'll be covering all that stuff as it happens. And then once the team actually starts up, I'm going to be covering it every day, just like I do with the Trailblazers. But if you are a Blazer fan, if you're in Portland and you're a fan of the Blazers and the WNBA team, I do cover the Blazers on a pretty day-to-day basis, and their training camp starts up a week from Monday. So that's kind of going to be the mode I'm in for the next 6 months after that. But I'll be following the WNBA stuff very closely, and I'll be reporting on that as stuff comes up, as they start the process of making some of those hires and figuring out the practice facility and then coming up with the name and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to be all over that stuff. So there's going to be plenty of coverage.
Awesome. Well, excited to see it. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Now go check on the Locked On NBA podcast where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to tune in tomorrow to hear from our WNBA draft crew and over the next few weeks for more WNBA playoff coverage.